Hello there, this is Kos Sharma from Creative Pad Media. In this tutorial, we're going to be looking how we can extend this entire backdrop so that we can go from something like this to this, which just looks more professional because everything else is filled up. So let's start this process. The first thing that we're going to do is we don't really need to fill in all the areas here, because if we need that negative space, we can get that by using the AI generative expand right at the end. So we don't really need to fill these areas. In fact, right now, just to make our job easier, we're actually going to crop this. So let's do this and let's hit enter. And now if we see, we are mainly just dealing with this white area and this part where this backdrop is folded. These two, we just have to make it seamless, like it's going all the way down. So we're going to be using Generative Fill for that. And if we are to do that, we need to make a selection first of the part that is supposed to be filled up, which is just this white part and this part. So whenever you are in this kind of a situation, usually it's always a good idea, which is that you just make the opposite selection first, because that's usually easier. And then you just invert that to get the other selection. Because when it comes to making, for example, the selection of the opposite parts, we have some automated tools, like we can go over to select and we can then go over to select subject, which is again AI based. So let's just wait for this. And you can see we've been able to get this part because that's what's going to be important. And if you think of it, the other part that we need to select now is this good part of the red backdrop that we want to keep. So we can take like a rectangular marquee tool. We can hold down shift to add to our existing selection. And let's just add it up till here, something like this, because then the rest of the area will get filled up by Generative Fill, and we are deliberately leaving a bit of the good part here also. So think of it like this: we are giving Generative Fill some idea about what is supposed to be filled in these areas. Okay, so usually it does a good job. Now, just one thing that you have to notice, that if you consider this selection, there's just one part missing here, which is the stool, because that will also be a part of this selection. That is a part of the subject. So that can be done very quickly, because if we take our object selection tool, we can just hold down again shift to add to the existing selection and just draw a rough area around it. And Photoshop should be able to then get this tool. So let's just wait for this. And you can see that that does a pretty good job. We don't even need to select the wood entirely, just this part, simply because when we do extend it, even if this red is seen behind, that's actually, it doesn't make any difference to us, right? So now that we have the entire selection, we just need the opposite of this. So we're going to go to select and invert this selection and then just run Generative Fill on an empty prompt. If the empty prompt doesn't work, then is the time that we'll probably think of typing something. But let's wait for these results here, because it usually works. All right, let's wait for this. And you can see this is the first result we've got. This time it just removed that folded part, but instead of extending it, it has only just given us this white floor. This is not something that we want, but you can clearly see, if we see the second and third variations, these look better. So this one looks okay, but the shadows don't really look real. Yeah, but something like this, I think this looks good. So sometimes you may not get it on the first attempt. In that case, what I usually do is just generate it 3 times. If that is not working, that is the time I write something on the prompt. So I'll probably type in red seamless paper backdrop, red plain backdrop, something like this, and try a few generations of that. But oftentimes these days, especially, Generative Fill does a good job, and within first or 2 generations, you're going to get your result like this. Now, the problem with this is that this doesn't look too bad, but there's a good chance that it changed some of the things here, which wherever Generative Fill was right at the edge of the selection, which is the shoes. So those parts can get a bit distorted. So let's just quickly see how to correct that. So what we'll do is, first of all, let's just stamp everything onto a new layer. And let's just call this AI layer, so that we know this is the one which we got after using Generative Fill. Now we're just going to hide everything, come back to our original. And now if you just think of it, mainly we just need to select the shoes so that we can put them on a separate layer and just put it on top here so that it can hide any imperfections. Because even if you noticed in the AI layer, things like laces and all also got missed out. Some of the things like the heels got a bit distorted. So what we can do is, we just, on our original layer, we can just make a selection of only the shoes, because that's the point of contact. And that's usually sometimes, these areas, since you have to select them in the first go very precisely, they're right at the edge, and that's where Generative Fill causes the problems. So this time you can see we've got a good selection of this shoe. Let's also do it for this. And let's wait for this. And you can see it's just missed out the laces this time. So let's just use this again. And now we can see that, yes, we've got both the shoes selected. Now what we can do is we can hit the shortcut, which is Control Command C, which is for copy, and then paste it, Control Command V. So let's do that so that this comes now on a separate layer. So layer 1 is where the shoes are. Now, if we just enable all the layers back, this was the issue that we are facing now in the AI layer. So what we can do is we can just pull this layer 1, which has the shoes on top. And you can see that that just solves our problem. So now if we just compare the results with the original by holding down Alt Option and clicking on the base layer, you can see some distortions here, but if it doesn't really make a difference to the image, there's no point in correcting them. And like I told you, in case you needed that negative space, which was there in the original shot, now it's very easy to get that, because if we just stamp everything onto a new layer using the shortcut Control Command Alt Option Shift E, so everything is here. Now what we can do is we can take our crop tool and basically uncrop this to get as much negative space as we want. So for example, let's keep her in the central composition and maybe just give some more space here also. And then we can use something like Generative Expand, which is again an AI-based tool, and just hit the check mark, and let's wait for the results here. All right, let's wait for this, and you can see that just fills everything up very, very nicely, and this just looks much better than what we started off, which was this. And with a few clicks, we've been able to use AI and get to this. So as you can see, Photoshop is, if you have to use AI properly, you have to know some of the basics of Photoshop. I'm someone who's doing a lot of experiments with how different AI tools inside Photoshop and in some other apps also can help photographers do their job quickly. So if you want to follow these experiments, don't forget to subscribe. Also like this video in case it helped you out, and I will see you next time.